I've played Dishonored 1 and 2 a while back with a lethal stealth playstyle, as most players probably would. I liked them for their great atmosphere, and Dishonored 2 especially for the level design. But then someday I got the urge to replay Dishonored 2 with a high chaos aggressive playstyle, and discovered that I really like the combat system found in that game. I think it's excellent, so I just want to talk about combat mechanics. Let's start with the sword. You can trigger finishers on enemies in a couple of ways, if they are unaware. If you close the distance fast enough before they can draw their sword to protect themselves, lowering their health enough with regular attacks. And if they are knocked off balance, which can be done by parrying their attack, sliding into them, landing a heavy attack, or various abilities that cause knockdowns. Dishonored 2 allows you to charge your sword attacks, which wasn't possible before. Slicing and dicing is great, but the heavy attack is a fantastic addition to the mechanics. This attack has more range, so it's good for keeping approaching enemies at bay. When we are talking about a melee combat system, then we are essentially looking at wind-ups, attack animations and recovery. What I really like is how animation locks and cooldowns only apply to one of your hands. It's easy to imagine how a sword attack could put you in a general cooldown state, but your left hand is still free to work on its own. Likewise, when you're casting an ability with your left, you can already start charging a heavy attack with your right. You can get this great sense of how you're controlling them independently. Along with the movement of your feet, you are inputting 3 things at once. It's a big reason why the combat feels so smooth. As you can probably tell, you can move pretty fast in this game, which is rewarded by the combat system. Enemies can only deflect your attacks once they are in an alerted state and have their weapon drawn. So you want to build up as much speed as possible to quickly close that gap. The vault animations are a great addition from Dishonored 2, makes maneuvering through the map much faster. In Dishonored 1 I always double jumped over small obstacles to skip the slow climbing animation. You also don't lose any functionality in the second game. Can still climb onto a railing when you're not sprinting. The double jump ability is kinda like your dodge, simply because you make so much distance with it. Up there, you're way outside of a sword's range, and shots could miss if you time it right. Double jump after a finisher is great to assess the situation, if you are surrounded. Gives you a bit of breathing room to pick the next target. Dishonored 2 also allows you to craft your own bone charms, which are kinda like perks on your character. You can stack the same effect 4 times on the same charm. This allows you to go really fast if you stack movement effects like slide speed or faster running speed while your weapon is sheathed. By far the most interesting aspect of Dishonored 2's combat is Far Reach. It's easily my favorite ability in all Dishonored games. What makes this ability so interesting is that it's not instant teleportation. It simply pulls you towards the target very fast. This allows you to use Far Reach in another way when you start adding movement to it while you cast it. Your character is accelerated by Far Reach. So if you were already moving fast, then you can use it to purposefully overshoot your target and launch very far. It's not just moving you from A to B, it's also like a grappling hook. It's here that Dishonored 2's combat moves from something like a first-person hack and slash game to something closer to a movement shooter. Entire streets can be skipped. You can launch yourself in and out of combat. It's really fun. What's great is that the game's controls allow you to be very deliberate about how you want to use Far Reach. Your character accelerates instantly when you sprint. So the distinction between Far Reach's 2 functions is just a matter of sprinting or not. Gives you really good control during a fight. With an optional upgrade, you also get a third function. You can pull enemies and objects towards you. It's great for singling out an enemy from a group. It also leaves them completely defenseless while in the air, so you can go right for a finisher. Very strong. But sometimes I prefer shooting them to not lock myself into the finisher animation and keep running instead. In the case of the pull function, you can't be as deliberate. It's just a matter of what you're targeting. So there can be cases where you wanted to jump to an enemy but pull something towards you instead. An alternative keybind would have been great here, with an optional setting to decide if you'd like pull to work based off the keybind or your camera aiming. Your character is incredibly strong in this game, so I like to play on the highest difficulty. Ideally with the Zephyr Bone Charm that increases your speed but lowers your defenses. Enemies die fast and so do you. Usually you're only allowed one mistake. Turns the game into Hotline Miami. Now I gotta mention some things I don't like. The dynamic FOV changes you get from sprinting and charging a heavy attack. The reason for this is to give you a sense of speed. But I think it's bad for the combat, because it messes with your depth perception. If an enemy is 5 meters away from your character, then this distance could look vastly different depending on the dynamic FOV. Makes it harder to judge if your attack is going to connect, when the zoom is constantly shifting in and out. An option to keep a static FOV would be great. The finisher animations look really good, but after a while I get tired of them and would prefer uninterrupted gameplay. It's honestly great when an enemy lands in an awkward spot where you can't finish them, so you get this nice and quick slash instead. A setting to disable the finishers would help the pace of combat in my opinion. The visuals of the adrenaline effect look really bad. You already get a sound cue when it's fully charged. The visuals are just too much and kinda ugly. Again, a setting would have been great. Dishonored actually has a huge sandbox of lethal combat options. But so far I've only talked about using your sword, far reach and the gun. That's because I think the other options are too lethal. They skip the good qualities of the combat system I praised, at a resource cost. Here is what I mean. If we look at this fight with 4 guards, you need some ingenuity to kill all of them. The combat is very aggressive, making use of your tactical awareness, aim and reaction time. And now here's that encounter if we use a grenade. The fight is already over just by cooking it. An upgraded wind blast instantly kills anyone that collides with a wall. Domino links enemies together, so anything that happens to one of them happens to all. Pretty direct way to reduce the combat encounters. You can transform into a shadow monster and instantly kill enemies regardless of their health or awareness state. I think you get the idea. If you play Dishonored 2 with no restrictions, just using everything at your disposal, then the combat actually isn't that amazing in my opinion. For me, this is not a big issue. When I'm playing a game that offers character customization, then I'm not looking to make the strongest character I possibly can. I'm looking for a playstyle that gives me the most satisfying gameplay, which is far reach plus gun. I've discussed some combat changes coming from Dishonored 1, and I also want to briefly talk about the third game, Death of the Outsider. Your movement ability in this game is called Displace. You set a marker where you want, and then swap to that position later. Sounds cool at first. You can set up a high ground position before engaging a fight. But you still have to aim at your marker to teleport to it. You gotta ask, what's the point? Because Blink from Dishonored 1 does exactly that. Aim at a position and then teleport to it. Displace does have some good applications for a stealth-focused playstyle. You have this other ability that freezes time and gives you an out-of-body experience. You can set displace markers in this mode to reach completely new paths. But for a combat-focused playstyle, Displace really is just Blink with extra steps. Your ranged weapon in this game is the voltaic gun, and it's pretty bad because of its inaccuracy. All Dishonored games widen the crosshair of your ranged weapons when you move fast. But the first 2 games allow you to buy accuracy upgrades for the guns. In Death of the Outsider, you can't. In the other games, your gun is a shotgun with multiple pellets. So even if you didn't kill because of the movement inaccuracy, then at least they are damaged and staggered. The voltaic gun can only shoot single projectiles. You either hit or you don't. So it's really in your best interest to stop moving and let the crosshair center for every shot. Makes the combat not as fluid. Other than those changes, the combat is still good. You can tell that this was meant to be a DLC for the second game. Mechanically, the core is still Dishonored 2 combat here. And Dishonored 2 combat is really fun. That's about it from me. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to see future content. Until then, goodbye.